That is Uruguay, the most egalitarian, the least unequal of the region, but that is more unequal than the most unequal of the European countries. So when I presented this report in Uruguay with the president of Uruguay, and I explained to him this because he's a very savvy man, but not by no means an academic. He comes from fighting a dictatorship, well, like me, but unlike me, I got a PhD and he didn't. So when I explained to him this, he said, "Oh, okay, all right. So like we're champions in soccer, but in the fourth category, not in the Premier League." So he got it. He got the message. So these high levels of inequality in Latin America and the Caribbean imposes a very important constraint to human development. And as shown in figure 3, the level of human development, which is like, you know, what identifies UNDP, this instrument that we developed by trying to say, look, we have to go beyond income per capita, and we developed this index of human development. Even that index of human development drops by a startling 19% on average when inequality is incorporated into this measure of the Human Development Index. The highest losses are observed in Nicaragua, Bolivia, and Honduras. And this is the absolute decline, and that's the percentage decline. And on the other side is Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay, that the loss in human development due to inequality goes between 3 and 6 percentage points. But despite these negative figures, there are some encouraging signs in recent times. Recent studies that we have done in several Latin American countries, including Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and Peru, shows that there has been a decline in income inequality in the past decade. A trend that, by the way, is not observed in the rest of the world, as we will see in figure 4. In OECD countries or emerging economies like China, India, and South Africa, inequality has actually increased over the last 20 years. But since we are so unequal in Latin America, we're still much, much worse than these countries. But the tendency in Latin America, interestingly, has been a slight diminution of inequality, while it is increasing in other regions of the world. This recent decline in inequality has been mainly due to a very interesting emerging, I would say, political consensus regarding the need to be more efficient in fighting poverty through better targeting, higher social spending, dedicating more of the budget to social spending, and through an expansion of educational coverage for basic and secondary education, which are motivated a change in the composition of the workforce. However, the countries of the region continue to be the world champions of inequality. And the reason then is, why would be that be the reason? And the reason is that although the coverage of public services has been widening in most countries, inequality is reflected in quality gaps. Expansion of published cash transfer programs, like Bolsa Familia in Brazil, Oportunidad in Mexico, Solidaridad in the Dominican Republic, or Chile Solidario in my own country, have had a very positive effect on school attendance and on some indicators on nutrition and health, particularly in children. However, these schemes are not linked to a higher quality of employment. In order to continue reducing poverty, we have to have more comprehensive efforts. First, designing strategies that effectively reach the poorest and most vulnerable populations. The report indicates that women, indigenous people, and Afro-descendants are the most affected groups in the region. Inequality is multidimensional. We shouldn't speak about inequality, we should speak about inequalities in plural, because it is in income, for sure, but it is gender, it is territorial, it is ethnic, and that is part of the problem in our region. Second, enhancing the effectiveness of universal policies requires increasing the amount of available resources to the state. Otherwise, the state cannot do the job of targeting, they cannot do the job of affecting the various inequalities I was just talking about. In this sense, we need a consensus in Latin America to ensure that state tax revenue meets social demands. And with few exceptions, Latin American countries are characterized by regressive tax structures. In other words, tax structures that are on consumption rather than taxes direct to property and to income. That should be. We have regressive tax structures in the region, and the tax burden is between 10 and 23 percentage points lower than other regions of the world, as you can see in this figure. In addition to this, the fact that the tax burden is much lower than in other regions, if we want to develop, that is, there's another problem, that tax evasion in the region in some countries reaches 50%, and that is absolutely unacceptable. You cannot do social policy without an adequate, well-designed tax policy that is fair and that accumulates enough resources for social investment. The report highlights also the existence of household mechanisms that reinforce and reproduce inequality between generations. So there are objective factors, such as access to markets, goods and services, but also subjective aspects of the problem, such as the formation of aspirations that play a very important role. Because when the distance between the aspirations of the people and the resources needed to achieve them is too large, the gap cannot be covered and hopelessness follows. It is typical of those families that say, well, why am I going to send the kids to school? We've always been poor, we are poor, we're going to continue to be poor. And because the resources to achieve their minimum goals is so big, then there's an attitude of pessimism and hopelessness that is also a factor in this perpetuation of inequality, in this passing of inequality from generation to generation. As an example, in Latin America, only 3.1% of young people whose parents did not complete primary school ever finished college. On the other extreme, 71.6% of youngsters whose parents have university degrees do complete their college degrees. So you see how then from generation to generation, inequality is being perpetuated through mechanisms such as this. And obviously, as I mentioned before, the persistence of inequality is not only because there are factors that are subjective and at the household level. The political process also responds differently to the needs of different social groups. The strategies for reducing inequality require, therefore, taking action on the low quality of political representation, on institutional weaknesses, on differentiated access of groups to influence policies, and institutional failures that lead to corruption and even the capture of the state by minorities that make the state respond to their specific needs and not to the needs of the majority. And that, you can see it in this figure as we illustrate this situation that feeds back and perpetuates, in a sense, against the possibility of reducing inequality. So this makes it evident that the political process that can exacerbate instead of compensate the reproduction of inequality. So there's no doubt that fighting poverty should continue to be a policy priority. We've made inroads in Latin America about that, but it's not enough. The instruments have to be to reduce inequality, and the key is that we have to reinforce those policies. Reducing inequality, I think, will create more connected societies, more coherent societies, societies that favor economic growth and social cohesion.